Hi, hello there. Right, let's get this party started, shall we? Good evening, hello, welcome. Welcome to Fear, Keeping It Real. I think it's really important that we all of us understand just how important it is to know that fear is nothing more, in my opinion, than an illusion. I mean, when you break it up, F-E-A-R, it can mean many things. Two of the most popular would be false evidence appearing real or face everything and rise. In my own case, I chose to ultimately, well, to be fair, I didn't choose, the choice was made for me. I had no option but to face everything and rise or succumb to the ultimate, but that's a whole different ball game and a whole different story. However, for the purposes of tonight and the sort of information that I'm going to impart, I think it will help many of you understand that we, not our minds, are in control of how we feel. Now, this is not going to be a quick fix. It's not going to be a solution to any of your problems or your issues or your challenges, your obstacles that you're facing. However, what it will do is provide you with the baseline information that will enable you to understand just how we get sucked into the fear mechanism, the whole business of allowing ourselves to buy into fear. And we're going to go right back to the very beginning. I don't mean the very beginning of my life or yours. I mean way back when. Because what many people fail to understand is we are operating today, we are operating today from a fear-based level of living, then we're doing it on a subconscious level, mostly. And oftentimes we don't even know why. So I'm really excited. I am actually, incidentally, way outside my comfort zone. This is the first time I've done a split screen share on Zoom. This is the first time I hopefully have recorded it. And this is the first time that I'm going live and putting my neck on the line, given that I live in a house that resembles Grand Central Station and anything's likely to happen at any moment in time. So here we go. I'm going to start off by reiterating that this session, this workshop, this training, call it what you will, is designed to help you understand the need to keep the concept of fear real. When we let our imagination run riot, our minds are in control. We don't need it to be like that. We need it to be the other way around. We very definitely need to be in control of the mind that is ours, and was gifted to us to create a reality of the dreams that we've all of us got. So I think it's fair to say that fear is one of life's biggest challenges, certainly in modern day 21st century. And that's largely because of the fact that as human beings, we have both the power of choice, the power of deduction, reasoning by any other name, and the ability to make up stories in our head that will fit whatever it is that we want to explain to ourselves in a way that we are comfortable with and can rationalize. The stories we tell ourselves oftentimes about whatever it is that's going on in our lives, because we all have an it, you know, mine just happened to be one of mental ill health and near subsequent fatal addiction. However, many people don't even get anywhere near that dramatic. But fear plays a massive part in their lives. Sometimes they're aware of it, oftentimes they're not. One thing I know for sure is that fear in itself these days is for certain, for an absolute fact, it is the biggest culprit, the biggest reason why so many of us don't do nearly half as much as we said we would, or we might do, or we would do, or we coulda, shoulda, woulda. If you're not where you are in your life today, and you're starting sentences with things like, yes, well, if I had this, then I would. If I was thinner, if I was prettier, if I was richer, if I was more educated, if only. When we combine if with a mind that's gone on holiday and we're operating on a subconscious level, and its bedfellow is that of fear, and for fear read anxiety, depression, mania, any sort of general day-to-day fear-based living, it's certainly a challenge. And these days I'm all about helping people overcome their challenges, and especially challenges that are rooted in some way in a fear-based level of living. So having accepted that as a fact, shall we move on? Excellent, let's do it. In real terms, it's really important that we understand that fears, our individual fears, it doesn't matter what they are no more or less than an emotional response. An emotional response to real or perceived threat of danger. I'll say that again. Our fears are no more or less than an emotional response to any perceived threat, real or otherwise, that involves an element of danger. Did you ever think about it like that? I never did for the longest time, but if you think about it like that, and you can think about something that is a fear-based element of your life, where does the fear come from? What is it about that situation that makes you fearful? And how and why would your brain think that it's dangerous? Or does it? Are you aware that your brain, your mind, is actually alerting you to a sense of danger, impending doom? Yeah? When we get into a situation where we are scared, anxious, fearful, depressed even to a degree, certainly panicked, several things happen in our head and in our bodies, all right, without exception, every single time. In the central line, either side of the central line in our brain, in our actual brain, there are two little almond-shaped glands called the amygdala. They form the operating system, if you like, of our emotional brain. And for that read, our emotions are driven, if you like, by the subconscious element of our head, of our brain. So the amygdala sit within the area that houses our subconscious, and emotion, incidentally, for those of you who may or may not know, what emotion means literally is energy in motion. Good energy brings happiness, not so good energy, negative energy can bring sadness and anxiety and depression. Energy in motion. We are all bundles of energy. That's a fact. Some have more than others, depending on our age, stage, and conditions, but nevertheless, we are all a bundle of energy. Anyway, the amygdala is I liken it to the guy at the top of the crow's nest in the film Titanic going, iceberg ahead, iceberg ahead. Yeah? It spots or senses an element of danger. In that second that it perceives a threat to our livelihood, to our survival almost, it very obligingly wakes its mate up in the captain's room below. The adrenal glands sit on top of our kidneys, incidentally. The amygdala wakes up the adrenal glands, says iceberg ahead. The adrenal glands scramble, jump into action, and very obligingly dump a great big shed load of chemicals into our bloodstream. We know these as our fear hormones, and the two primary suspects, or even culprits, are adrenaline and cortisol, amongst many, many other sort of bits and bats. It's essentially what I call a chemical shitstorm, to be fair. And there's nothing we can do about that when that happens. It's a physiological reaction between two operating parts of our individual, as in yours and mine, systems. Hold this thought. If you have ever been in a fear-based situation, and or you have ever been excited about something, The chemical shitstorm that's going off in your brain and in your body is exactly, and I mean exactly, the same. The chemicals that are dumped into our bloodstream when we are excited are exactly the same as when we are scared to death. The only difference is our perception. Let me give you an example. I have a friend who is a theme park junkie who likes nothing more than to queue up for hours and hours on end to get on the front row of whatever thrill-seeking ride he's on at any minute in time. He'd be quite happy staring down 300 feet on the front row of Oblivion in Alton Towers, for instance, and if I was sat next to him, he would be orgasmic with excitement and I would be scared to death because I would be certain that I was plunging to my death. And yet we are both of us having the exact same physiological reaction chemically in our bodies, in our minds, in our bloodstream. The only difference is what I think and what he thinks. Strange that, isn't it? Perception. The physiological effects that we've all had on many levels are any one of these combined. Hot sweats, anxiety, our eyes go wide as though we're searching for an escape, etc., etc. Palpitations. If you've had any of these here at any one time, can you trace it back to the situation you were in at the time these were happening? What had happened? What had triggered your response? We know now what just happened physiologically, but what was the actual trigger that alerted your amygdala to wake up its mate, the adrenal glands, and say, come on guys, we've got a situation here, we've got to get this pace, we've got to essentially get this person safe. We've got to get them safe. That's all this is. If you've had any of these in any combination, then you have had for sure a form of anxiety, an anxious episode at the very, very least, if not scared to death for real reasons. In simple terms, we call this a stress response. And in simple terms, the amygdala alerts the adrenal glands to the possibility of threat or danger. We have a release of our stress hormones, the chemicals that prepare us to run away, essentially. And if we don't manage to escape in time, we start to panic. These are very, very simplistic way of describing the whole thing, but I need to make sure that everybody understands what I'm talking about. If you don't, please feel free to ask questions or drop a comment below when you see it come back as a post in the group, and I'll happily answer any questions that you've got to the best of my ability. 3 simple stages. We get an alert, we have a release of all the stress hormones, for that we need the fear hormones that are designed to make us wake up and smell the coffee, as it were, and realize that something's going off. And then we get into an overload of, oh my God, what am I going to do about this? And if you're prone to being anxious, that's more than likely the time that you're going to have a panic attack or an anxiety attack at the very least. All of this comes together in a perfect storm. It makes us want to either stand and fight our corner or run like hell. In essence, it triggers what today we all know to be the fight or flight response. All right, we're either going to stand and fight our way out of this or go down trying, depending how brave we feel, or we're going to run like hell. There's very little in between. Some people try to reason it out, some not. It's okay, because the good news is we were designed like that. As human beings, we were designed that way. Way back when, prehistoric man, primeval times, way before dinosaurs ever ruled the earth, man was designed to survive. And nature's way of making that happen was to gift us an amygdala and some adrenal glands and make sure they worked in conjunction with each other so they could wake us up and get us the hell out of there if they needed us to. The guy in the crow's nest on the Titanic was simply the klaxon of the horn that signaled every single person on that boat to get the hell out of there or die trying. And as we know, sadly, very many people did. Prehistoric man had a much, much more simple life. He was designed with what we call an innate behavioral trait. He was designed to be able to be afraid. Understand that. He was designed to be able to be afraid. He was not born afraid. He had a very simple life. He had a dangerous life, inhabiting the world that he did at the time that he did. And that's the reason he was gifted, even in the most primitive of states, an amygdala and some adrenal glands. In basic terms, when the two work together to trigger our fight or flight mechanism and keep us safe, that's all they're doing. They're doing nothing more or less than keeping us safe and helping us to survive. And in primeval times, that would quite simply have meant that he didn't get eaten by a saber-toothed tiger, or he didn't fall off the end of a cliff and die while trying to escape being the tiger's lunch. It's part of who we are. Without exception, every single person on the planet today is equipped with exactly the same operating system when it comes to fight or flight as we were at least 65 million years ago. At least 65 million years ago, we were hardwired to adapt and react very quickly to danger. You're going to run like hell if a saber-toothed tiger's trying to eat you, yeah? We were designed to react very, very quickly. Get the hell out of there. It's a naturally occurring survival tool. And if it wasn't, more than likely the human race, man as we know it today, would not have survived. Primeval man wouldn't have survived. We wouldn't have evolved, and we definitely would not be having this conversation. All right? Technically, fear in and of itself is for sure a lifesaver when we know how to control it. In 21st century life, however, today we know for a fact, going back to the innate behaviors, it is a fact that we are born with the ability to be afraid. Primeval man wasn't born afraid. 21st century man isn't born to be afraid. Nobody in the millennia in between has ever been born afraid. We are all born with just the ability to be afraid. It's that simple. Keeping it real here, people. It's that simple. We know, however, today, we know that humans are naturally afraid. Our innate fear, the innate trait that we have regarding fear, innate means genetically predisposed. We are genetically predisposed to be afraid of just two things: falling, which indicates heights, and being startled, which indicates loud noises. Primeval man, falling for him would have been not falling off the edge of that cliff while the saber-toothed tiger chased him, trying to eat him. And being startled would be hearing the saber-toothed tiger roar like buggery behind him and make him run away, hopefully not to fall to his death. We are designed with the ability to react and respond quickly to the perceived threat of danger. Real or otherwise, real or perceived, we're designed to react and get the hell out of there. And yet, so many of us these days are afraid of so much more. So what changed? What the hell changed in all the millions of years, let alone millennia that we know that we've been around for, 2,000-3,000 years? Millennia, absolutely, millions of years have gone by. And if we could get a snapshot in time, the time that the human race as we know it is exhibited as an inhabited time, space in time, is minute. And in that time, something's changed. We become completely obsessed with so many things that actually, in reality, aren't at all dangerous. The 21st century man, previously 20th, previously 19th, it's gradually over, several thousand years. We now know that when our consciousness is developed enough, because let's face it, when we're born, as babies, when we're born conscious. If it's a live birth, we're born conscious, but our consciousness hasn't yet developed. Okay, that happens very quickly after birth. And an innate characteristic in a newborn whether it's a monkey, a lion, or a human, the innate characteristic of a newborn is to suckle. Is to sort of root around, find mum's breast and suckle and feed. Boom, survival instinct. Part of the fight or flight, survival instinct. When a newborn baby is delivered, especially in the Western world, I'm not sure about sort of the Far East and further, but in the Western world, in a live natural birth, particularly, oftentimes two in a section, they will grab the baby from the mum, they'll hold it up by the ankles, they'll smack its backside gently, and technically they're making it alive, making sure it's alive. But what they're also doing is taking a newborn infant from 9 months of that, cocooned inside the mum's womb, 9 months of solid, safe, secure environment where that child has no need ever to be afraid. It gets delivered, they hang it upside down, make sure it's alive. Yes, that happens, they make sure it's alive, but what it also does is genetically, it flips a switch in our amygdala to say, hello, bump, new life arrived. This person needs to understand how to run away when it needs to. Simple as that. Our fight and flight is triggered very quickly after birth, and it lies there dormant until our consciousness develops. When our consciousness develops, we start to take notice of things. We're born without filters in our head. We're born without filters, and everything just goes in. Between 60 and 85,000 thoughts per day, as adults, certainly assault our senses. And the brain does a magic job of sorting everything out. Keeps what we need to know as an operating system here in our heads, in our conscious. What we only need to know every so often, how to drive a car, for instance, remember how to drive it. When we need to drive it, we remember. That gets stored in the middle, and everything else gets dumped in the unconscious. When we develop a memory, and our consciousness helps us to learn to remember stuff, we develop the ability to learn, and we learn very, very quickly. 0 to 7 years old is what we call our imprinting stage. We are imprinted with facts and figures and all sorts of information from our environment, from our parents, from the way we're brought up, from our friends, from what we're subjected to, verbally. These days it's sort of TV and tablets and all that business. All this stuff is going in 0 to 7, and it begins to form the foundations of who we think we are as we grow. And that's where a lot of the trouble starts. Doesn't actually matter what the parenting style is like. Good parenting, bad parenting can create equally anxious children for many, many varied different reasons. That's a whole different training. But for now, hold that thought. When our consciousness develops and our memory follows very quickly, we start to remember things. Ask yourself, what's your earliest memory? What's the earliest memory that you can pull from nowhere? Most of us will have a happy memory. Mine is like smelling the fresh baking bread on my grand's hearth when she's baking, real baking, not one of these bread machine malarkeys that they have today, right? That sends me back to a happy place. I can remember it. But I also have some dark places that I remember as well, and I don't want to go there again, ever, to be fair. But by the age of 7, not only have we started to learn, we started to remember. Everything we do, from the minute our consciousness and our memory make friends, becomes a learned behaviour. Learned behaviour starts very early on. A newborn baby will start to cry very quickly if they're uncomfortable. They don't know they're crying. It doesn't have a name. Their consciousness is not developed yet, but they are aware enough to know that something's making them uncomfortable, and therefore they make the noise that we call crying. They don't know our responsible grown-up will do something to make that discomfort go away. They just know that when they go, "Wah," it's going to stop. Fast forward 12 or 18 months, and that same baby is screaming, paddying, as we say here in Yorkshire, tantruming, fighting, pulling hair, nipping, biting, screaming. And parents around the world are screaming at their child to shut up. And suddenly, we're in the middle of terrible twos, and kids are like, what? This has worked for 2 years. I've been crying for 2 years and had my every need met, and suddenly I'm told to shut up, or worse. We learn very quickly. And from that point on, we also start to learn what's acceptable to our grown-ups and what's not acceptable to our grown-ups. If we're lucky, we grow up to be safe in the knowledge that we're beautiful or handsome, clever, intelligent, a bright spark, funny. If we're not so lucky, we grow up to know that we're thick, stupid, fat, ugly, an idiot. And it's not our fault. As children, anything that happens to us, good, bad, or indifferent, and the projections that we absorb from our environment and from our parents, that is not our fault, ever. But the hangover, pardon the pun, the hangover of that is as we grow into adulthood, as we morph from 7 years old onwards into, say, 7 to 14, it's our modelling phase. Imprinting 0 to 7, modelling from 7 to 14. And I'm not talking about walking down a catwalk here. I'm talking about acting out our behaviours. What we know to be true about ourselves, we start to act out. Ask any teacher in any school in the world why that boy is behaving like he is, and they will say, he's a naughty boy. We play to our labels. We do what we know to be true, because the thought cycles come into play. What we think, we speak like about ourselves. I'm talking about what we hear enough into our heads from other people. We start very quickly as young people to think about ourselves. When we think it, we start to speak like it. When we speak and think like it, we act like it. And before we know where we are, i.e. circa 7 to 14, we already believe it. How many of us believed by the time we were 14, who were pretty, beautiful, clever, would be no doubt the next brain surgeon in the family? But equally, how many of us thought we were thick and stupid and too poor to ever rise above our situation, and or let alone go to university, God forbid, and get a degree and be the first one in our families to do it, because nobody in our family does it. We're all thick. It's not your fault. In childhood, you cannot help what happens to you. However, when we move forward from that point on into adulthood, then it's a different story slightly. Anything that's happened to us in our childhood, we can't do anything about. Stephen Covey got it right when he said we can be defined by our circumstances or how we choose to overcome them. Now, I don't know about you, but I chose to be defined by my particular circumstances for a very, very, very long time. And to be honest, it almost killed me. I'm here to tell you guys, it's not worth it. It's not worth it. If wherever you are in your lives today, if you need to do something to change and become happy or thinner or more productive or whatever your it is, mine, as I said earlier, just happened to be mental ill health and subsequent near-fatal addiction, born on the back of my mental health, which was born on the back of childhood trauma, incidentally. I just forgot the little chestnut that when I became an adult, the choices I was making was mine. The choices I was making were mine. But I didn't take responsibility for any of it. And again, that's a whole different training, but I just needed to put that in there as part of the puzzle that I'm trying to explain to you. As children, we didn't know it, but the E plus R equals O equation was in play. As adult, if you don't know it, you need to know it, and you need to remember it after tonight. Every event plus our reaction or our response will give us the outcome. Every time. It doesn't matter what it is. Your job, your education, your relationships. Every single event that ever happens to us, the outcome is dictated by our reaction or, more importantly, our response. If you've ever seen the film Sliding Doors, you'll understand what I mean when I say you catch a train one day and it goes right instead of left. You got on the wrong train, you're going in the wrong direction, and your life turns out like this. Had you got on the train that was going left instead of right, your life would have turned out completely differently. Every choice you've ever made, ever, in your life, or will ever make to come, is a sliding door. When we take an event and we react to it, When I'm teaching kids in schools, what I say to them, if you're reacting like that, what you're doing is you're shooting from the hip. It's a knee-jerk reaction. You're not engaging this before you're opening this, and you're creating a scenario that didn't necessarily have to happen. Something happens and you just pause a minute. Sometimes as long as 10 seconds is enough to engage this before you open this, and you give a response as opposed to a reaction. A response is a considered reply. The outcome is almost always different to what it would have been had you been rude or insulting or shouting or screaming. Every event, and for an event, that could be a conversation, it could be an incident at work, it could be overlaying, as in sleeping in when you should be on the bus already. Every single thing that happens is an event. Our response or our reaction will dictate the outcome. How many times have you slept in, been late for work, and you've had a day of hell, stressed out, fed up? Why can't I ever be on time? Why do I always miss my bus? Why do I always get stuck in a traffic jam? Da 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 da. The endless, relentless inner diatribe. It's coming from a fear-based perspective. Fear drives anxiety. I'm going to be late for work. I might be late for work. Oh my God, if I'm late for work again, I'm going to lose my job. Fear. What will my boss think of me? Blah, blah, blah. Fear of being judged. Fear. You see where I'm coming from this? Every event plus the reaction gives us our outcome for the day every single time. And yet we can choose to take a chance at any point in any day to switch our mind around and change the way we see things. Sleeping in might cost you half an hour of anxiety or stress while you run to get ready and catch the bus or get in the car and get stuck in traffic or whatever. But you need to leave it at that point, because then you've had just maybe half an hour stress. If you let it run around in your head and blame it for everything that happens in that day going forward, by the time you go home at the end of the day, you've had 12 hours of complete stress, you're stressed out, you're worn out, you're knackered, you're fed up, you're bad-tempered, and you're exhausted. And you blame everybody else around you except yourself, when in actual fact, your fear-based start to the day is what triggered all the above, and yet it only lasted for that long. A microsecond in the great scheme of things. I'm happy to discuss that point with any of you at length later, if you so choose. But trust me, you can change the way you think anytime, as long as you're willing. Going back to our emotions, emotion, energy, emotion, when we add consciousness to memory, events and reactions and outcomes, when we sort of put all that together in a nice, neat little package, which incidentally doesn't exist, just for the purposes of this, they largely fall into two camps: enjoyable or painful. Enjoyable or painful. If you have an enjoyable experience, you will do anything to repeat that. That's certainly how addictions form in the beginning. In my case, the first half a lager I had when I was 18, amazing. Wanted to do that again the next Saturday. Before I know where I am, I'm 52 and I'm 24 hours away from dying because I enjoyed it that much I forgot to stop. And more importantly, I never even considered E plus R equals O. I never considered that it was a learned behavior, and I never considered that it was a fear-based way of living. Crazy. My enjoyable situation had become a painful situation a long, long time ago, before I even woke up and smelled the coffee instead of the Chardonnay. But I couldn't stop. And yet, I blamed something that had long since had the power over me to create any chaos in my life. The chaos in my life was totally inside my head. You will do anything to repeat a pleasurable experience. You will run like hell, metaphorically, away from anything that brings you pain and angst and anxiety, depression. Stay in bed much longer than you should or could, indeed, ought to. But it's not your fault, because by this point, you're operating on what I call automatic pilot. We're not reached yet the point of automaticity in terms of reframing the way we see ourselves, our situations or our lives, because we're too rooted, even if we don't understand it, we're too rooted in a fear-based way of living. And it's all being driven by these little buggers in our heads, the amygdala and the adrenal glands in the kidneys. We sense, they know something's triggered us. Something triggers us in an anxiety-related way, for instance. Boom, 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 boom. Cortisol, cortisol, adrenaline, adrenaline, shot of this, shot of that. There's a state of heightened alert here. The brain doesn't know, it's just responding to our perception. That's the difference between us and primeval man. We have a greater sense of perception of what will cause us distress. Distress to the mind signals danger. Our mind cannot decipher if that danger is a saber-toothed tiger wanting to eat us, or the fact that we're late for work and we're scared that we're going to get sacked. Does that make sense? I do hope so. Please let me know if you want to expand on that. When we are living in a fear-based, conditioned state, you can forget going on X Factor, doing anything that will take you outside your comfort zone, because you're scared of so many things related to external circumstances. You're not concentrating on what's in here or what's in here. You're concentrating, you're externalizing what might happen if, the future focus. What if this happens? What if she says that? Oh my God, what if? You're not going to go and put yourself up to be on the X Factor because your fear factor's been born and it's stopping you as well as any 6 foot thick barricaded steel wall would. The power of our mind when we've given it over to fear does exactly that, without exception. So far, and just very quickly, remember, we are hardwired with the ability to be fearful. We're not born afraid. The innate tool that is our fight and flight response is a naturally occurring survival tool. It's no more or less than an emotional reaction to perceived or real threat of danger. It's a physiological chemical reaction that starts in the brain, gets the adrenal glands in the kidneys on board, whacks out a physiological chemical shitstorm of hormones and all sorts of chemicals through our bloodstream, and there's nothing we can do about that. The behaviors that we exhibit surrounding fears are innate, only insofar as we have that ability to be afraid. As a 21st century human being, male or female, you have learned, however, by whatever reasoning or course of action, whether it's your conditioning in childhood or how you've grown as an adult, you have learned everything else. And you've learned it because our minds, our consciousness, when combined with our memory, have attached an emotional significance for the need to either repeat or avoid any given situation. Fear-based living, without exception, although I've put there usually because I have to, but in my opinion, fear-based living is almost certainly, shall we say, anchored in an emotional pain point. And we might not even know what that is. We might never know what that is, ultimately the root cause, but I promise you it is. Let's take a quick look around these babies, shall we? Because we've all been here. If I say this one, the opinions of others, we're all scared of what people might think at some point in our lives. Whether you're a kid growing up in school, oh my God, I've not got the same trainers as my mate. He's got the real most expensive trainers. I've got my plastic Asda jobs. You know, we're scared of failing. We don't like making mistakes for fear of being seen like an idiot. Failures are a bit more catastrophic because everybody knows. You know, why change things? I picked this because the other doors were grey and that one's red. Why change something? If it's not broke, don't fix it, my dad used to say. We don't like change. We don't want to stand out from the crowd, because if we do, somebody up here might have an opinion about it. And then if we drop dead or we fail or whatever, or we make a mistake, they're all going to know, and it all happened because I changed something. But this little bugger here, that signifies for me the most frightening of all: the fear of lack, the fear of not being enough. I did some research online recently, and 75% of respondents told me that their biggest self-limiting negative belief or behavior pattern was rooted in the fact that they didn't feel they were enough. Not good enough, not pretty enough, clever enough, rich enough, whatever. They didn't feel that they were enough as people. But you know what? Not one of them could tell me why. They just weren't. That's not true. We're not, any of us just are. Seth Godin said, we get what we settle for, but we don't have to settle for what we get. If you fall into that camp of not feeling as though you're enough on any level, then perhaps you should consider talking to somebody about it, because I promise you, you are. I would argue the toss with anybody. I don't care who you are. That's not true. I do care who you are. And I do want you to be happy and healthy and whole. But if you don't think you are enough, you are highly unlikely at this moment in time to be happy or healthy or even whole. It's almost impossible. There is a lot you can do about it, but again, that's a different session, because this is a factual based for your information type session. But I promise you, whoever and whatever you are, wherever you are today in your world, in your life, you are enough. I don't care what anybody says. You need to believe it. They're in that particular lesson. None of those situations are dangerous. Failure, change, mistakes, being lacking in any way, opinions. None of them, not one of them is dangerous. And not one of them is meant to trigger the fight or flight. It's not meant to wake these up in our heads and our kidneys and say, come on, this person's in danger. Going back to what I said a little bit earlier, it's our perception of a situation, event plus reaction equals outcome, is what triggers our anxiety. Our brain doesn't recognize anxiety as anything other than the chemical reaction that it's triggered. And therefore, in our mind, it's dangerous. Nothing about any of these situations is dangerous in the simplest of terms. Clearly, there might be, the exception to the rule. But for the purposes of this, these in themselves are not dangerous. The consequences, different subject. But as far as our mind is concerned, these are not what fight and flight is triggered by. We're supposed to run away from saber-toothed tigers and not fall off of cliffs. And for that, these days, you could equally read getting run over by a train or falling off a multi-story building. Same type of analogy. Anything else doesn't even come close. No, it does not. Before any of you say, yes, it does. And again, I'm coming from a place of kindness there, and empathy and compassion, because I know that it's not. None of these things are dangerous. They only become life-threatening if our lack of self-worth, self-love, self-belief, self-esteem, confidence, etc. have plummeted so low that technically they do become life-threatening because of how our mental state has developed. But in and of themselves, no. When we can look at it realistically, look at an event, pare it back, and change our reaction from reaction to response. Going forward, I'm talking about we can't do anything about the past. We should only ever look back incidentally to see how far we've come, and or bring the lessons that we learned along the way into our future, so we can springboard ourselves into a brighter future. Bring the lessons from the past into the present so we can springboard to a brighter future. That should be everybody's aim. Anything that's gone before has no power over us except that which we choose to give it. So why are so many of us increasingly living from a fear-based perspective? Why? Maybe that might change now for you in some way. I hope it does. At least when you've had a chance to watch this back and fill in the worksheet. The worksheet, incidentally, is in the group, in the file section. Download it, print it off, and work through it. Watch this back again many times as you need. I'll post it in the group, and then you'll be able to. Please don't post it outside the group. It's meant for group members only. But that's a request. If you feel somebody genuinely would benefit from seeing this, just give me the nod and send it across. It's not a problem. The reason so many of us are living by default in a fear-based level of anxiety, depression, etc., from a fear-based perspective, is that the partnership between our amygdala and our adrenal glands, this partnership has a design fault in and of itself, in that there's no off button. There's no inbuilt switch that goes, this is not a saber-toothed tiger or a roaring train. This is just somebody's opinion. This is not the edge of a 40-story building or a cliff top. This is just change. There isn't a switch. The switch that's triggered at birth doesn't have an off button. And because of the way we live, in the time that we live, and all the other pressures that are around, peer pressure for one, keeping up with the Joneses, got to have a better job, bigger car, it doesn't know how to stop in and of itself. In the same way that the subconscious operates our living system, it teaches us how. It doesn't even teach us, it does it automatically for us. We automatically breathe and blink to get grit out of our eye. We cry when we need to sort of lubricate our eyes. Yes, it's an emotional response, but we cry nevertheless. It gets rid of various things. We breathe, our heart beats, we cry tears, we twitch, we scratch an itch. We don't have to think about doing any of that because we're doing it at a subconscious level, and that, as adults, is brilliant. Because if we didn't do that, we'd spend nothing else in our day doing anything else other than remembering to breathe, remembering to beat the heart, bump, bump, bump. The body and the mind, the mind-body connection is amazing for that. The mind-body connection has a design fault in that it can't distinguish between the anxiety you and I face if we don't get the grades for this exam. We're fearful what our parents might think if we don't get the grades. It's not a saber-toothed tiger, but our mind doesn't know that, because the same chemical reaction that happened 65 million years ago is happening today in 2019 and beyond, no doubt. 21st century humans largely live on automatic pilot. It's taken us, however old we are, it's taken us this long to get to where we are in our heads. The self-limiting, negative, fear-based beliefs and behaviours that we've come to adopt all the way through our lives, incidentally, to bring us to this point in our adult life, we've got here by becoming the sum total of every single thing, good, bad or indifferent, that has ever happened to us. And when things happen so often and we respond the same for so many times, we live at a level of what I call automaticity. We do it without thinking. If you doubt that, tell me the last time you got in a car, you drove from A to B, you got out of the car and went, wow, how have I got here? You've done it so often, you don't even remember the journey. You're clearly conscious, you clearly survived because you've not crashed, but your mind knows that route so well that it's just driving it for you. That is what's happening when we don't address the self-limiting negative beliefs and behaviours that we've been driven by, because the driving of those fears go much, much deeper than the subconscious mind. They're coming from our unconscious brain, our reptilian brain. And our reptilian brain is designed to live in survival mode. Going back to the thought cycle, our thoughts become the way we speak about ourselves, particularly, and or others, to be fair. Our thoughts, what we think, becomes how we speak, becomes how we act, becomes what we believe. And what we believe is that we're in danger most of the time in the 21st century, although we don't call it danger. We call it anxiety, we call it panic, we call it stress, we call it overwhelm, overload. It's a fear-based living. And the reptilian brain can't distinguish in the way that it should be able to, in my opinion, because it's not evolved. It's not evolved as fast as our subconscious, our unconscious. It's not evolved as fast as we, the human race, have. If we're living on automatic pilot and the reptilian brain is living in survival mode, boom, we have a conflict of interest. We've got to do, we've got to do, we've got to do. Oh no, they're trying to do this, it's going to kill them. It's an internal diatribe that we don't even know is going off. We have to reclaim the power that is ours to create the life that is ours alone to live. And we can't do that by living on automatic pilot. And it takes persistent, consistent, positive action. Sometimes massively small baby steps are all it takes to start that journey. It doesn't matter how long it takes you to get from where you are to where you want to be, only that you do. It doesn't matter that you have to make monumental adjustments in the way that you think, only that you do. But you won't ever get started until you're prepared to take that first step and take the chance to choose to change. Because the little bugger, the little monkey that is our reptilian brain, won't allow us to do it without a fight. It likes being in charge. It likes being dormant. And it likes only thinking, oh, hang on. It's totally unresponsive to anything that happens in our lives, but it's totally driving. It's the engine, if you like, of our brain. If you're with me so far on this, then it's time to understand that you can regroup, realign, and refocus your thoughts, particularly at any time, because it's your mind. You can do it. Fear of change, failure, the opinions of others, making mistakes, not being enough. Very quickly, change. Colonel Saunders retired at the age of, 64, I think it was, with something like 104 American US dollars to his name every month by way of a pension. He also had a little restaurant selling chicken. His Kentucky, what we now know as Kentucky Fried Chicken, but the shop wasn't making him any money. And he knew his $104 a month pension would very quickly be swallowed up if he didn't do something. To cut that particular long story short, he sold the restaurant, kept his recipe, sold his recipe on, and franchising was born. When he retired again, some 9 years later, he sold his share in Kentucky Fried Chicken for about $2 million. 9 years previously, he had $104 a month to live on. $2 million at the time that Colonel Saunders, rather, of Kentucky Fried Chicken fame, when he retired, that $2 million was worth a hell of a lot of money. Had he not sold that, his family now would be billionaires in their own right if they'd kept the business. The opinions of other people didn't stop J.K. Rowling. She's got sort of 12 or 13, I think it is, rejection slips in her top drawer, in her castle in Balmoral, or not Balmoral, that's where the Queen lives, obviously. She lives in a castle in Scotland. The single mum with a daughter who didn't have any money, couldn't afford a laptop or a computer, couldn't even afford to buy the coffee that she was drinking in her friend's coffee shop, while she sat there and wrote Philosopher's Stone, longhand, and her daughter lay sleeping in the pram at the side of her. She believed in herself and she ignored the fact that the opinions of others said she was rubbish. And Harry Potter, Philosopher's Stone, that's never going to be a hit. I'd pay to see their faces the day that she hit the jackpot. She is now a billionaire, I believe. Who cares? Good for her. Shame on those that didn't have faith in her. She believed in herself. How much do you believe in yourself? Failures and mistakes are largely lumped together for many of us, but essentially nobody ever got famous, got rich, became successful without making their fair share of cock-ups. They just didn't. Walt Disney went bankrupt with Laugh-O-Gram Studios before he designed Disney as a brand. Mickey Mouse came into being, and we all know the rest, as they say, is history. There isn't a child in the world that doesn't know the name of Disney or any of its characters. He was bankrupt. His failure led him to believe that he could just try harder and get there. I think it was him that coined the phrase, if you can dream it, you can do it. Who am I to argue? He proved it. Our mind and the ability to be afraid of so many things these days, our mind is what stops us from jumping over that hurdle of bankruptcy or rejection or fear of failure. And it leads us to believe that we're not enough. And I'm here to tell you for sure, again, you are enough. Don't ever let anybody tell you that you're not. You just need to realign, regroup and refocus your brain, your mind more importantly. If your mind is ruling your life, it's time to reclaim your power. Without exception, it's time to reclaim your power. You can forget Apple or Google. Your mind, our mind, my mind, your mind, it's the most powerful operating system there will ever be, bar none. Just to quickly recap how I use the analogies when I'm talking to kids particularly, our conscious brain is our operating system. It's the thing, you switch your laptop on, boom, it's operating. Your conscious brain is operating. The subconscious brain is a bit like the folders, the files that you find on your laptop. You store all the information in there that you need to retrieve at any given time. The unconscious brain is the equivalent of the recycle bin. Everything gets dumped in there. Anything that's ever happened to us, anything we've ever seen, ever thought, ever done, we've not forgotten it. We just don't have the capacity. So it's stored in the unconscious brain. The same unconscious brain that's the reptilian brain that's completely unresponsive and totally driving. It's where our beliefs and behavior patterns are stored because they happened so long ago. You can reboot your mindset anytime you like because it is an operating system. And Steve Jobs, Bill Gates, they don't hold a candle in terms of what they know, or rather what their systems can do, to what our mind, let alone theirs, are capable of. 10% of our mind, 10% of our mind, brain, we use at any given point in time. 90% of it is lying dormant. And the subconscious and the unconscious are having a party because we don't know how to reframe it. We don't know how to reframe the way we see things. I'm telling you now, the absolute fact of the matter is that we are the only ones who can create the reality, create the future that we deserve. Not only do we deserve it and desire it, we actually totally need to do it. If you don't, and you're still in the same place 5 years from now, would that be a good thing? I hope it would, because that would mean that you're firing on all cylinders and you aren't letting your mind ride roughshod over your feelings. Our thoughts become our reality. The biggest battle we will ever face, any of us, is the one that goes on inside our mind. You can't do that. If you do that, that's your subconscious and your unconscious having a party. And they often win because we don't do the things we say we want to do. Make no mistake about it. There's a reason actually this group is called Everything Begins and Ends With You, because it does. I genuinely believe it. Everything begins and ends with us. How we think, how we speak, how we act, interact, react, respond. Everything begins and ends with us. The thing is, can you accept that? Do you accept it? Because if you do, there's a lot you can do to change. So let's think about it. All these come together in a hodgepodge of, shall we say, I'm not enough. Many of them are born in myth. I can't do that because if I do this, then I've gone bankrupt, so therefore I'm a failure and I can't start. Is that a fact? Possibly. But is it a fact that can stop you from rechanging and reframing and reorganizing your mind to rewrite the story of your life? No, it's not. Definitely not. When we change our story, we can change our mindset. When we change our mindset, we can change our life. I love this picture. This picture makes me smile every time I see it. I really hope that bird's head's photoshopped like that, otherwise I shouldn't be smiling. But when we change the way we look at things, the things we look at change. Dr. Wayne W. Dyer said that. Wayne Dyer was an American philosopher, poet, guru. massively miss these days. He passed away some time ago, but he got that right. When we change the way you look at things, the things you look at change without exception. You learned how to be the person you are today. If you're happy with that, then I am absolutely, totally, utterly thrilled for you. If you're not and you want to change something, the onus of that, the responsibility for that lies very firmly and squarely on your shoulders. Thing is, today is the youngest that any of us are ever going to be. On balance, how much more time have you got left to waste? If you're living a fear-based way of life, there's a lot you can do to change. I hope this training's helped. Please download the worksheet, fill it in. If you have any questions, drop them in the comments box below when I post this video into the group, and I will look forward immensely to having more of these types of conversations. And I look forward, she says, trying to do that, I look forward to seeing you all very, very soon. Take care. Good night.